Poddin My Noggin, hosted by CK Sims, creating a platform to elevate, educate, and heal by creating a space where people can share their stories of struggle, triumph, and redemption. CKS Media.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Poddin My Noggin. I'm your host, as always, CK Sims, and this week we are joined by Dr. Nigel Brayer. Welcome, Dr. Nigel. How are you?
I'm doing good, CK. Thanks for the invite. I look forward to a good conversation today.
Yes, well, so it's very interesting. I'm interested. So I did have an opportunity to go and read. So first of all, I'm a staunch feminist, if you will.
Okay.
So I'm all about anytime there's someone in the world who is researching or doing the good work of addressing women's health issues, right? Because as we know, there's so many gaps in research and study for women. So you are known for your system called the Iron Bladder System program?
Yep. Ironclad Bladder, yes.
Ironclad Bladder, right. Okay. So Incontinence, it's for me, I know it's a rampant thing. Everybody experiences LBL at some point in their lives, more so if they've had children and more so as they age. So you have developed this system that helps, and you have proven that helps women with this particular issue. Where I'd like to start today, though, is to go back. What were you doing before this sort of started to manifest in your life?
Sure, and that's a great question. I had another person ask me that, and she stated, she goes, "You're the reluctant bladder doctor." And I thought, you know what? That's a perfect title, because this is not something I necessarily wanted or even chose. I kind of digress a tiny bit. This kind of chose me because I think, and not to get all out there on you, but the universe knows that I like to solve problems, and it put a problem directly in my face after my wife had our last child, and she became incontinent. Now, I talk about it so easily right now because it's just, that just happened, and that set him on his motion. And obviously that took a long time for that to all transpire. It took many, many months before I even knew what was going on, primarily because she just started avoiding things. She started avoiding activities. She started not wanting to travel. And I'm not talking long travel. I'm just talking just travel like a 15-minute drive. And so I noticed that her life started to change. And I thought, well, it was because of our last child. And I thought maybe it was postpartum depression, which it was not. And so, being a problem-solving male, I guess I took it upon myself to try to figure out, well, what's going on? And after much probing and probably pestering, she kind of opened up. And I thought, oh, well, simple enough. I'll just refer you to, back to your gynecologist, make sure everything's working fine, problem solved, let's move on. And of course, that led to the next step was there was nothing physically wrong. So then the next step I referred her to a pelvic floor physical therapist, which is kind of the next step if you don't want to use medication or go into other stuff. So she went through pelvic floor therapy, which is a real common type of treatment, where they did internal and external work. They taught her different Kegels and different exercises. And after many months and many dollars, it still wasn't a whole lot better, minutely better. And so we went back to the doctor, the gynecologist, and they said, well, I guess we have surgery as an option. We can do what's called a sling, where they put like a literal sling underneath the part of the bladder where the urine comes out, called the urethra. And that started to get pretty invasive. And she's like, well, there's nothing physically wrong with me. I just can't control my bladder under certain circumstances. And so I guess there was really no good options. So that led to me like, well, I have the option of having my wife back with activity and life and, being involved, or pads for the rest of her life. And I'm like, that just wasn't acceptable for her or for I. So I just started to deep dive into anatomy and physiology, all things that I learned once, but when you're in practice, you don't use all parts of anatomy every day. So I started digging deeper.
I want
And
to pause you real
yeah,
quick because I
sure.
want this story. For listeners at home, what type of doctor were you before this?
Sure. So I'm trained in several things. So I'm trained in what's called functional medicine, which is how all the systems work together. I'm trained in chiropractic treatment, which is more neurologic, how the nerves and spinal cord work together. And I'm also trained in acupuncture. So those have been kind of my three realms for the last almost 28 years. But the last probably 4 or 5, I've really been focusing on bladder simply because there's really no great options in that sphere at all. It's surgical, and if I don't recommend watching TV much, but if you do, is notice that commercials are primarily there's at least 1 or 2 pads per hour on
Mm,
commercial television.
it's a
So
big difference.
yeah, and so clearly there's a need because the makers of those products are spending a lot of energy putting it out there. So long story short is I really dedicated my time to saying, well, gosh, 70% of women over the age of 40 have some form of bladder issues. That's a lot of women. And so what happened in my practice is I just started developing a system. I started studying and realizing that most of what current bladder treatment's for is for the muscles and soft tissues around the pelvis. And so the pelvis is below our waistline. And when I look deeper on what's called the neurology, that means the nerves and how they function, only 30% of the nerves are what are called consciously controlled for the bladder. So I ask people, or I break it down this way, is you're not beating your heart right now, it's just beating. If you
Yeah.
decide to get up and jog in place, or you're laying down and sitting back up, your heart rate goes up, your blood vessels constrict to keep the blood going to your brain so you don't pass out. That's all autonomically controlled. So 70% of our bladder function is autonomically controlled, meaning you're not controlling it. It's being controlled by the underlying landscape of your subconscious.
Okay.
So, not to get way deep into the weeds of psychology, but your whole lifetime is shaping your subconscious mind. Well, that subconscious mind is, in effect, the general tone of your bladder. So, when stress builds, when trauma builds from, let's say, childbirth or car accidents or fill in the blank, those things are influencing what's called your neural tone. That means the general tone of not only your muscles in your body, but also the ones inside of you, like your bladder, your colon, your bowel, etc. So, interestingly enough, once I started to look into ways to change that, and of course, my wife was my main focal point at that time, and we started working at it and changing and doing. And so I integrated the physical changes with what's called neurologic somatoneural retraining. And then I brought in my acupuncture training to start to kind of reawaken and rebalance the energy pathways. And when I did that, we had a 99% resolution rate within about a month and a half. And so what I did next, kind of and again, as I'm conglomerating a long period of time into just a few sentences, but then I started going into my office and pulling out the files of some of the ladies I knew who had children. And I started thumbing through their files. And we do this thing in our office, which most doctors do. It's called a review of systems. So you're reviewing things that aren't necessarily related to why they saw you in the first place, right? So if you came in with a knee problem, you would fill out this stuff about your heart. And so I started looking through, and the majority of the women over the age of 35 had checked off urinary incontinence as one of the issues when they came into my office. And I thought, oh my goodness, why didn't I see this before? And obviously, I wasn't looking for it, so I didn't see it. And so I had a long list of these patients. And as they started coming into my office, I asked them, I said, well, how's this? 5 years ago, you noted that you had incontinence. How's that going? And the majority of people still had it. So what I did is then I took a cohort of those group and I said, hey, I've just developed this program. Would you be willing to, partake in it? And I had about 100 women that went through over a period of about a year. And we saw enormous changes. Everybody improved, majority of them fully resolved. So I thought to myself, wow, this is pretty cool. And so what I did is that I asked them, I said, well, what's been holding you back from getting the treatment that you needed from other people and other doctors? And it resonated what my wife had told me when I started pestering her. She goes, well, I'm embarrassed. I don't want to have this conversation. She
Yeah.
goes, that's something we should all be able to do. We shouldn't have to question whether we can control our bladder or not. So there's a huge amounts of guilt and self-worth and all these other issues that are attached to it. And then so I asked the ladies, I said, well, what's holding you back? And that was the number one reason they didn't share it with, their doctors or even me. And then the second is the time and the money. So if they were going through the process in my office, they would be coming in regularly for 30 to 60 days, which takes their time and it costs money to come in. So I thought to myself, well, can I take this process and really strike away those three top barriers? Get rid of uncomfortable conversations, get rid of the time barrier, and dramatically reduce the money barrier. So what I
Yeah.
did is I made it into a program online where people can do pretty much everything that I would do in the office at home and have the ability to track and see the outcomes. So that's why I'm bringing it out now, because it's a nice way to get it out without the uncomfortable conversations. Just kind of
Well, so
cool.
like when you say that, I automatically think like, um, there's a psychological component there because, uh, sorry, I have a puppy
Yeah,
and
it's awesome.
um, she, not she. So there's a psychological component there because when we're kids, in the school ground, like people say all the time, like um, don't pee your pants or Mr. Pee Pants so the incontinence thing when you're an adult, like there's such a I can only imagine how much sort of a shame they would be feeling, um, embarrassment, afraid of ridicule, all of those particular things, all those components compiled. What's sad though is that they don't feel comfortable talking to their doctor about it. That's the sad part. You hear often though, not just about that, but about so many other things. Where did I want to go? I have goldfish brain, and someone just distracted me. So it's interesting too because when I read your story and about your wife, I'm thinking to myself also on top of that, I'm like, I think for such a large portion of the world, unless you're a woman and have been through actual childbirth, we always romanticize pregnancy, right? We romanticize the fact that you create life and you get this beautiful bundle of joy afterwards. Rarely do we spend the time to talk about the absolute destruction that childbirth does to your body and what that can look like, you know, leading up to childbirth, during childbirth, and then also after childbirth. Now, women are a completely different breed of people because they have the ability to like make it look easy, but what happens is so crazy. So I was reading that, and then the incontinence thing, I'm thinking to myself, there has to be some form of trauma in that area when they're giving birth, right?
Well, absolutely true. There's that, and then there's absolute trauma. But our body's design is to heal trauma. Now, again, it comes to various degrees, and healing isn't usually even like a broken bone. Because if you break a bone, it's going to heal, and that repair will be evident forevermore. And so it's not like it totally returned back to its original state.
Correct.
But then you also have to look at other factors. So now imagine you're a gymnast. I'll just use an analogy, and you've spent your whole life becoming extremely flexible. Well, those tissues are used to that functionality. When you think about childbirth, is the hormones change and a lot of things happen to make those tissues do things that they don't do on a regular basis. But just like any sort of thing, when it's been stretched to such a degree, it rarely goes back to exactly the way it was. Now, it'll go back quite close, but then you have to understand in first world nations is we're so inundated with that sympathetic, that fight, flight, the go, the strive, the push. So even if you look back, and obviously I wasn't around 500 years ago, but if a person would have had a child, obviously they would have had to work in the fields and provide for their food and stuff, but there was more of an ability to rebuild. Here it's like you have a baby and you just hit the ground running after 2 weeks. Even
Hmm.
I grew up in the 70s, and it was very common for a woman to have a baby and for her to be, if she worked outside of the home, she might have 6 months off, or she would generally be home with that child, where she might have more opportunity to be able to repair and rebuild. So there's a lot of factors where is childbirth is definitely a challenge to the human body. There's no questions. Culturally, we put things in place that are challenging it in several different areas also. So
Absolutely.
in my 28 years, I've been seeing a lot more problems health wise, not a lot less. So we have more finance, we have more pharmacology, we have more access, but we don't have more health. And so I find it interesting is our bodies aren't necessarily becoming stronger, they're becoming weaker for various reasons. The physicality has changed, nutrition has changed, chemicals have changed, our neurology, how we cope with life has changed. So, those are all components that add to or subtract from the whole healing process for men and women.
Absolutely. And it's like, when I think about in the US that you get typically about 6 weeks post care, right? Like you can take 6 weeks. What is it? Family leave, I think it's called.
Correct.
When you're having a child. That's the average amount of time someone can take if they don't have another opportunity or, say, another breadwinner in the house that can support everything or
Sure.
that sort of thing. But then all of the stuff that you're talking about is like the health has gotten worse over the years. But that correlates though because the grind's gotten
Greater.
more intense. And like it's the access the all the access to social media. Piper, sorry, I she does not normally do this when I'm on there. She'll do stuff, but not this. Um, all the access to social media, all the access to like all the news, like the work, the connectedness, everything is just psychological components that are continuously adding to our overstimulated bodies, I think. For women specifically, so your wife now is cured of.
Yeah, she's been leak free for over actually closer to 5 years now, to be honest, when I started really implementing the program. So, yes. So she's had no issue since. Now, obviously, health is a process. So I call this the $1 million problem. At that time, the $1 million problem in our life was incontinence. Um, but health is a progression. So, both her and I continue to do better with working on reducing toxins that build up, to reducing stress, to finding a practice to counteract the things that you just mentioned. That constant bombardment of the things we have to respond to is, if you
Yeah.
think of our body like a big bucket of energy, and if you're expelling 70% of your energy on just constant day-to-day things, you don't have a lot of ability to repair. And so I guess the whole health journey is, how do you get your energy back, which is by closing some doors, and then how do you provide for the system so that they can start to heal? And a lot of people are shocked by this statement, is our body's natural state is health. And so our natural state is not disease. So disease is like a barrier. So I liken it to electrical wire that runs something really important. If you put resistance along that pathway, whatever machine or electronic that thing is running, it has a lot less electrical energy than it's required. So it's going to struggle along and it's going to do its best. But when challenges come, it's going to break down further. The body's not a whole lot different. So part of the big idea with health is, how do you reclaim and get back your energy, because you have a finite amount. And if you waste it on a bunch of other stuff like worrying and fretting and controlling and all those other things, well, that's influencing your body's capacity to heal, which will include your bladder, it'll include your GI tract, your mind, fill in the blank, all of the above.
So we're going to come back to that. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Partner today with CK Sims and Poddin My Noggin to get in front of an audience that cares. You will be supporting mental health stories, tales of resilience, and uplifting content, aligning your brand with bringing goodness, authenticity, and kindness front and center. This spot could be yours. Do you have a story of struggle and resilience? One that you want to share with others and possibly help someone through their own struggles? Find the link in the show description and fill out the guest form today.
Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we're talking to Dr. Nigel Brayer about how he came to develop the Ironclad Bladder. Did I say it right this time?
Perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Awesome. And he has a great story, and we're talking about the impacts of all of the modern day sort of afflictions, I guess, that fight against our natural state of health. So can you repeat the statement that you just made? So the one that people are shocked by.
Sure. They're shocked to understand that our body's natural state is health. And so another simple analogy is I think about a flower, or a plant of any sort. What does a plant really need? It needs clean water, it needs sunlight, and it needs soil. If it has too much or too little of any of the above, there's a whole myriad of different diseases that can be created, right? It makes itself vulnerable to all of the different ails. Well, the body's the same way. Is as we create resistance in the systems, we create resistance internally. And for patients, I break this down into a triangle. I call it the stress triangle. And so stress will be anything that's going to suck away or take your energy. And now being stress-free has its own issues, right? So we need to be challenged, but too much challenge can be depletive. So, and those three stressors are, you've got physical stressors, which could be how your physical function's working, your anatomy, your physiology, how the mechanical parts fit together. That would have been like my wife going to the pelvic floor therapist. Hey, is the pelvic floor muscles, do they work? Are they there? Have they been scarred? Has the nerves been cut? That's the physical. Then you have the nutritional, chemical, and hormonal. So food is chemistry, right? So if I'm putting foods into me that bring me up, generally my body will get stronger. If I put foods in me that deplete me, then it takes resources from me to try to get rid of them. So a simple analogy would be if somebody drinks a bunch of alcohol. Well, they're putting that in, and then the body has to use tons of its resources to try to get that out. So now it creates depletion. And bearing a child would be one of those. It's a wonderful thing, but the energy to create a being has to come from somewhere. Well, it came from the mother. And so it took from her everything to create that child. Well, did mom ever get that back? She probably didn't. So if we think about our food supply being challenged and we think of chemicals in our food, well, the food generally isn't repairing us like it used to because it's coming with a whole bunch of baggage that the body has to deal with. So now you have a mother who doesn't even have what she needs to repair for what she's given the child to be born, right? And then the final stressor would be mental. And so we've all done this before. You get really worried and uptight and your stomach hurts, or you get anxious for something and you start to leak urine, right? That's a common thing for many people. And that's all really based upon the mind. So the goal is to address those three main stressors. Now, those same stressors are addressed with the majority of the conditions that I treat, but when it's specific to the bladder is if we focus on those three main stressors, the body's natural state is to start to be functional and repair itself when you start to take those away, which is pretty exciting, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So the Ironclad Bladder, you've taken it from clinical practice, which I'm assuming people can still come see you in a clinical sessions if they would like.
Yep.
But you've converted this now to a tweaked version of that to be an online program that they can take. I think it's 30 days. Is
Correct.
it 30 days?
30 days.
So have you had time to do the research with the online program and to see how that plays out in similar sort of.
So, in terms of tracking, like I did initially, I haven't done tons of that yet. We're kind of just getting the platform going, kind of building the momentum. So, we've only had some smaller classes. We have a new class coming up May 1st, and this will be one of our larger ones. But in our pilot groups, we've taken groups of 15 to 20 women through the 30-day program. And what happens, and what's really kind of exciting about it, is with that 30-day program is it's kind of like a cohort of people going through a process together. So one of the big challenges I've noticed with all of us, but in this condition particularly, most of us think we're alone, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm the only one with this problem. I don't want to share it. Nobody will know how I feel. But what's really cool is with the 30-day program is we meet once a week. I lead those groups, but we also have an online group where women can communicate and interact with other and share. So part of the big platform here is if we start to open up the dialogue, we can start taking away that stigma. It shouldn't exist, but it does exist. So we just have to address it. And I've noticed that as more and more women start to share their stories, it really empowers others to say, hey, I'm going to take some steps. I'm going to have some conversations. I'm going to, it just really empowers them, which is so exciting.
Well, and that brings it right back to what we were talking about before, all of the psychological components, right? So when we attack anything in life, and I use the word attack, but say approach is a better word. When we approach anything in life, it's often better to approach it as a community, and you'll see more lasting and sustainable results because you're doing it as a community, as if you try and be the lone wolf and do it yourself. It does work sometimes to do the lone wolf thing. We've seen it,
Sure.
but like just in that very what you're explaining, that the platform that you're explaining, that's creating community,
Sounds
um, directly impacting the mental health of. So it's I'm lost for the word, but it's almost like just gone. This. Maybe we'll have a conversation after about ailing memory as one ages, cognitive decline. So, but yeah, but it's creating the community, and you're having these groups. But one of the three stress triangles is the mental. So
correct.
you're kind of solving that with just even opening the floor for this community.
And so perfectly put, CK, because remember what, if we dig deep into where did this all stem from in the first place, there's no doubt a physical component, there's no doubt a hormone component. So that's established. But we have to look at the sympathetic tone, the fight flight. So the analogy I like to think about is imagine I clench my fist as hard as I can constantly all day long. Well, I'm going to exhaust myself and then I'm going to have to just let go because I can't sustain it. So when our body's in this what's called constant sympathetic state, so sympathetic is the fight flight. So in North America, the number one cause of death is heart disease. Well, heart disease is a sympathetic disease. It's caused by long-term stresses effects on the heart and blood vessels. High blood pressure is not a disease, it's an effect of a sympathetic problem. So the same people who are having heart conditions from a sympathetic disease are also having bladder issues. They're all part of the same thing. So the key becomes is we have to down regulate or turn down the fight flight by making some changes first internally. Then we have to what's called upregulate. That means turn on what's called the parasympathetic. That's the healing, restoring part of us. Now we're supposed to be balanced, and that's the whole premise behind all of life, but acupuncture in particular, is balance allows our natural state of health to occur. Imbalance causes a depletion where something's stealing from something else, and it can only happen so long before disease processes manifest. And again, it starts with the nervous system because when the nervous system is balanced, then all things that rely on it, which is your entire body and your mind for that matter, can start to regain over time. And again, it's time dependent, can start to make shifts. So that's kind of the big take home is we have to address the nervous system before we go deep in the anatomy. And that's why my wife's success was so limited with the purely physical mode of treatment, and why most women's are. Because the major component, remember, 70% of that valve of the bladder is controlled unconsciously, the sympathetic, parasympathetic.
That's
So,
really interesting.
yeah.
Processing. Yeah, so that's really interesting to me. And so, like, how does one, just high level, right? Because if people are really interested, there's so many things that you can actually do post this interview to learn more. But just high level, what would you recommend someone to address the sympathetic sort of dysregulation, if you will?
Sure. So the simple 2-second version of this, CK, is two things. First, pull out a notebook and start writing down everything that crosses your lips. I call it the food mood journal. Okay. And people say, well, what does that have to do with my stress or my not the stress? Well, it's the first step in starting to become aware of what goes through you into your body affects your body itself. Then the second thing I have people do is I would like them to usually to set their phone 3 times a day to just beep or ring or whatever it might be to tell them to mostly just stop and take 10 slow breaths, air in the nose, air out the mouth. And all you want to do is just visualize that the air is going up your nose, moving around and coming out. Now, that's called mindfulness, but really what it's doing is it's stopping people from, I call it the hamster in the head, where we're constantly spinning our wheels. And then we're thinking of something and we're spinning on that topic. And then that topic spins into something else. And that goes on incessantly until we fall asleep or we can't sleep. So we're up all night. So what it does is it just starts having people pay attention to two simple things that aren't threatening. What's going across my lips without judgment? And then breathing simply a few times a day with the whole intention is to just breathe. You don't have to connect with any higher source. You don't have to hum or whistle. You can do whatever you want, just breathe. And over time, without even trying, it's going to start morphing because people will start noticing, hey, I look forward to this moment of breathing. Or you look back over your food journal and you say, oh my gosh, I'm consuming these things at certain time of days when I'm grumpy or I'm happy or I'm angry or whatever. And we start making these connections that we previously were unaware of. Super simple, just takes a little bit of effort.
I like that a lot because it is just simple things, right? To develop a practice of mindfulness without, like, I like the non-denominational, if you will, or non-religious type sort of connection. And then it's that break, right? We need to break the cycle. As you said, hamster in the wheel. We need to break the cycle. And it's not going to happen magically.
Yeah.
Right? Or it will, and to a degree, but it'll be too late for you, or you'll be in some sort of dire situation that you didn't anticipate. So, so those are two. So the food mood journal is very simple.
Sure.
To write down everything that's coming, everything that passes your lips. I mistook that. I was thinking everything you were thinking or thought, but you're talking about everything you ate.
Correct.
There we go. Okay,
Yep.
so I made that mistake. So everything you eat, keep a journal, okay, and then 3 times a day, set your phone to go and stop and take 10 deep breaths, visualizing the air moving into your nose, deep into your lungs, and out through your mouth. And you do that 3 times a day.
And that's
Good.
based upon that triangle, CK. So remember the triangle, you got the physical, you've got the nutritional, chemical, hormonal, and then you have the mental and emotional. So you're really hitting the two parts of that triangle is you're starting to be aware of the nutritional, chemical, and how you feel and how your emotions and your foods tend to interact. And then also you're starting to consciously take a little mini time out. And then you'll start, after as little as a week, you'll start to feel some changes, mostly in your neck and shoulders. But some people notice that their angst will start to settle too. It's pretty simple, pretty cool.
And so you wrote a book. We wrote 2. So let's talk about your first one. I'm just trying to double check something. So I didn't want to get it wrong. So it says, "Excuse me, ladies, by chance do you pee your pants?" is your book. So
Correct.
tell me about that.
So that book is based upon the Ironclad Bladder program. It kind of goes deeper into the understanding yourself, understanding your anatomy, your physiology. It goes deeper into what are the common medical treatments for this type of condition, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And then it also outlines the ironclad bladder and why it works and kind of the more basis of its effectiveness. And then the book I wrote several years ago called The Stress Effect, How to Rescue Your Life, and what was it called? I forget the subtitle, but anyway, it's really based upon that triangle we were just talking about. So most people have this thought that disease is very scary and it's very complex. And there's no doubt that the ins and outs of anatomy and microbiology and physiology can be complex, but you don't have to get into the weeds to become healthy. Really, what you got to do is just understand some basic components. And just like we talked about with a minute ago about food mood or about breathing, is if you implement a few small things, it has a huge impact on your whole life. And that book really talks about how to implement these smaller changes, how to make them stick. And then I'm a big why guy, is if I understand why something is, then it's a no-brainer why I would do it. But CK, if you just told me do this because I told you so, or do this because I'm a doctor, I'd be like, yeah, sorry. It has to make sense. So I write that book, or all of my stuff I write, for people who are more like, I want to have a basic understanding. So when I'm feeling challenged or I want to give up, it makes sense to me by reasoning to continue on. Versus I want to give up. This is just pointless exercise because somebody told me to do it. Right. So it's really trying to set the platform for the highest rate of success.
Okay, I love that. So your books are available online and in bookstores.
So primarily on our website. So most the excuse me, ladies by chance is hard copy and ebook, and people get that as part of our Ironclad Bladder program, and they also get the Stress Effect book as part of that program.
Oh,
So
nice.
they can buy
Okay.
it directly, or if they prefer, they can join our 30-day program, and then those will come with it because those are a big part of the platform that we're going to be teaching people for their success.
And then the 30-day program, you can sign up at, well, first I'm going to say it looks like it is this. So drnigelbrayer.com. So I'm going to link that obviously in the description so everybody can find it easily. And so you're doing this, you're out here, you're spreading the word, letting women know that, you know, there is hope for LBL and incontinence. Yeah, what's next for you?
So I just want to share this because I get this question a lot, CK, and you didn't ask it, and since both of us are men, a lot of women are like, why are these men talking about women's incontinence? How do they know they're not women? And I've been asked this question a lot of saying, hey, doc, why bladder? And I obviously my story is personal, so I want to share, but also I want to share something that my wife brings up regularly. She says women are spaghetti, men are waffles, and obviously that doesn't make a lot of sense right off the bat. But you know, when she explains it, she says, well, women take all things and they intertwine them together like spaghetti. So you can be talking about one thing and quickly the topic will change to something else, and it'll all morph into like 50,000 things that end up totally on a different topic. So one of the key things, and why I'm really focused on bladder in particular, is because I've noticed because men are waffles, they're able to sequester things better, saying, hey, I'm focused on this. This is my focal point right now. And once I'm done focusing on this, I'm going to focus on something else. That's what allows, you know, men to be more closed-minded in certain times and women to be more open-minded in a lot of stuff. So when it comes to this, I found that that's been a real helper with women when it comes to following the path that I'm laying out with our Ironclad Bladder System. It's like I can keep the big picture in mind as we go through the process versus kind of get caught up in the emotions of the problem. And they're big and they're real. I'm not discrediting them. But the real point of it is how do I help women regain their bladder control versus how do I help women and then get lost in a lot of the shall I say, emotional challenges that go with the problem itself. So I've come to realize that being a male has actually helped me to help women better than if I was a female, just from an interesting standpoint and observation, because I get that question frequently. So I've just kind of, spun the wheel of saying, you know what, this is really helpful because I truly can't feel what you feel like, but I can fully embrace the problem and fully help you along the path, which is kind of exciting, kind of fun.
Well, I think it helps that it was born from love, the
True.
desire to help, right? Like to, helping your wife was your priority and helping her regain. But what I like about what you're saying in the sense is that you're saying you're very focused in the sense that you're there to help them regain bladder control, not get lost in the weeds of the emotions. However, you are solving so many of those emotions by helping them stay on topic,
Agreed.
right?
Agreed.
They're all intertwined. And I like that analogy. Women are spaghetti and men are waffles. I think women are just complex creatures in any way, every way. But I think that's what makes them so wonderful,
Agreed.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're out here doing God's work, Dr. Nigel Brayer. And I'm sure you've helped a lot of women. I'm sure you will continue to help a lot of women, and those women thank you. And then if you are a woman out there and you are experiencing any form of incontinence, or LBL as I will call it, go to drnigelbrayer.com. Sign up for the 30-day program. Get his book. Excuse me, ladies. Oh, do you pee your pants? Do you pee your pants? And then the stress effect, how to rescue your life and master
That's
the
the
art of
art of
living.
living. Yep.
So you can do this, and it's 30 days. You also get connected with a community of like-minded women, or women who are in the same sort of situation that you are. So you can build that community and realize without question that you're really not alone. So thank you, Dr. Nigel Brayer, for being on the show, for sharing your story with us, and for doing this great work. And for everyone out there listening, get out there, and until next time, live your wildest dreams.
For media and sponsorship inquiries, email info@cksims.com or visit cksims.com and fill out the contact form. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. A new episode airs every Saturday. CKS Media.